Humans of the cardboard, welcome back to Just Nuts, guys. Today we need to talk about Fabled. Yesterday we talked about Jurak because these are the two archetypes confirmed for Terminal World 2, which means they are confirmed at probably, I would say, at least 4 cards. There's no real evidence that shows that they will absolutely strictly stick to the 4 cards per archetype, but I think it seems likely they'll get 4 cards. The biggest difference here is Jurak is one of the worst archetypes of all time. It's certainly on that maybe top 10 list, especially relative to how many cards they've gotten. Fabled, though, however, is not nearly as bad. Fabled actually has a handful of cards that actually do some solid stuff. So what we're going through today is going to go through all the tools that Fabled already has at its disposal, and then at the end we're going to talk about, like, after looking at all the tools it has, what kind of support, what level of support would it really need to really get into that level of at least competitive play. I think rogue decks can be considered like decks that are relevant for competitive play, but not every deck has to be tier 2 or tier 1, but I think at least rogue should be the goal for Konami to make this set interesting. So let's get into it. There's a lot of Fableds that are weird because they like act very similarly, but let's get into it. Speaking of which, a couple of years ago, Fableds actually got newer support in a core set. A couple of those cards will be shown here because they're some of the better cards the archetype has. The first one here is Fabled Marcosia, and while this was a newer card, which means it's not hard once per turn, it actually does have 2 solid effects. So from hand, this card can discard 2 monsters to then summon itself, and then if this card is summoned this way, if it's summoned that way, it can gain 200. So it gives you a good discard outlet, but also, if this card itself is discarded, you can add a Fabled Spell or Trap from your deck to your hand. What I like about this card is it gives me those tier limit feels, in that one of my problems with Light Sworns forever was that either they had archetypal cards that were one of 2 things: good to like send out of the deck, mill, and good cards that helped you mill. So you had good engine cards and then bricks that were only good to be milled. Same thing with tier limit, but like tier limit was just all their cards were like kind of both. Most of their cards are just good to be milled and good to draw. And that's what I like about Marcosia, is he can kind of get you discards or be discarded and still get you value in either way. So I like this card quite a bit. Alright, next up you have Lurie. We know Lurie, he's part of the Fiendsmith stuff. You discard him, he summons himself back. Basic. Kushano. Actually low-key important card in the archetype. I like that in graveyard he can activate to discard a Fabled and add himself back to hand. I actually like that he doesn't summon himself and adds himself back, because he helps you get you a discard outlet if you get him in rotation without forcing you to like run out of hand advantage. He does replace your hand advantage 1 for 1 while giving you a discard outlet to trigger another card that would hopefully plus you from there. I actually like this card. I think he's probably going to be a 1-of in the deck, maybe going forward. Grimro. This card's cool. I don't know that it requires you to have a Fabled on field, but if you have a Fabled on field, it can discard itself to basically add a Fabled monster from deck to hand. Decent flexibility there, gives you a little bit of utility. I don't love that it requires a Fabled, but like all things considered, it's one of the better cards in the archetype. A Bonk. If this card's engraved, again, discard a Fabled to special summon this card back. I just don't love that this card banishes itself when it leaves the field, but it is a tuner, which is a plus, and it's not one. This one is once per turn, the other one's not once per turn, so that's the other main difference. But this one being a tuner could actually be enough to make it worth it. Next up you have Nozuchi. During your main phase you can discard a Fabled, and if you do, special summon this card from the hand. And then when this card is summoned this way, you can special summon a level 2 or lower Fabled also from your hand. It's all hand stuff, so it is technically like a -1. I don't love this card, but it's not the worst extender in the world. It's worth noting. Chawa. During the main phase, discard 1 Fabled monster, and if you do, special summon this card from the hand. This card just jumps out of the hand without having to pull another one out of the hand like Nozuchi, so that's like cool. But Nozuchi's not mandatory, but the difference is this one's a tuner, so again, like, just weighs on like certain lines. Does this card come up in certain lines? We'll have to see there. Cat Sith. If this card is discarded to the graveyard, target card on the field, destroy it. So this card is basically Atlantean heavy infantry, but for Fabled. I think there's a decent chance this card actually does end up in the deck as a 1-of for setups where you end on a guaranteed quick discard on the opponent's turn, and then also just like are able to search this card and end with it in hand, similar to infantry, like very similar roles in my opinion. But I do think this card could be a one of in the deck for sure. Cerberell, if it's discarded, special summon it. It's just not a fiend, but other than that, it still is a level 2 tuner, so that could come up. Ganassia, if this card is discarded to the graveyard, special summon it, and then it gains attack, but whatever. It isn't a tuner, so that's like the one downside, but like in any synchro deck, you do need tuners and non-tuners, so there is a world where this card is still decently playable. Fabled Cruise, if this card is discarded to the graveyard, you get to target a different Fabled monster in your graveyard and special summon it. I don't love this one because it takes setup, whereas Lurie just comes right out. And same thing with Ganassia that we just looked at. But there is a world where like there are other more valuable Fabled monsters on field, and if you can get them in grave early, like getting them back can be worth it. But not a terrible card. Fabled Raven, this card, the only real relevance for this card, in my opinion, is just the fact that it gets you discards by just being on field. Almost, I don't know if we've run into a single monster so far in the main deck that actually gets you a discard on field. It's all activate in hand or activate in grave, not much stuff on field. So Raven's one of the few. He just buffs his attack, so it's not like a really relevant effect, but he does get you discards, and he modulates his level 2, which matters, and he can discard any amount of monsters, which could also matter, right? If you just have a handful of cards that want to be discarded, this card can help you, like, just outlet them all. So, weird card, but, like, could actually be relevant. And then Soul Keys, this card is one of the dumbest cards I've ever seen. Konami has kind of messed up certain archetypes in designing some of their cards. Soul Key says if this card's engraved, you can send 2 cards from your hand to the graveyard to special summon it. That does not trigger any Fabled monsters. So this is just a Fabled monster that does not have synergy with the other ones, because the other ones, almost the entire archetype says if this card is discarded to the graveyard. This card does not say discard, it says send, so it does not trigger any of those. Otherwise, it could be a pretty interesting card, and it's also a light, so it could have even been a factor to help you make either Wave King, High Caesar, or Beatrice, but just straight up doesn't, because it sends. So, weird one. Fabled Galabas, this card can help pop a monster by discarding a monster. That's cool. Dianara, this is a normal spell negate on the first normal spell activated by your opponent. The weird thing about this card is that it has no effect to get itself on the field, and the archetype doesn't even really have ways to get it on the field. I only brought this one up in a world where, like, this maybe could be a one of, in a world where Fabled just gets, like, really cool support that just tutors a Fabled out of deck. Like, just pretty generically just summons any Fabled straight out of the deck. Then there's a world where this card is maybe playable just as an end board piece, but other than that, it won't. Stairway, cool spells and traps, actually. I like this spell. It Foolish Burials any Fabled, which is nice, because some of them do activate in grave to give you discard outlets. It has an extra bonus effect to, like, draw some stuff, or add back from grave by, like, discarding 2. Which, again, good discard outlet, and has another sort of bonus effect, but that's not as relevant. And then the trap is kind of cool because it reborns a Fabled, it discards a card, and pops a card on your opponent's field. So it does get you pretty good value overall. I don't hate this card. It could be a one of in the deck that's searchable off of Marcosia. Then we get to the Synchros, extra deck stuff. Unicorn is one of the most crazy cards in the deck. In fact, it's the only card in the deck that is an actual end board piece. So it says when you and your opponent have the same number of cards in hand, negate all cards and effects activated by your opponent, and if you do, destroy those cards. So, first off, I believe this is one of those cards that is worded in a fashion that like kind of puts it that it doesn't change, it doesn't activate in response to an effect activation to negate it. The way it's worded, it's a continuous effect that kind of just negates stuff on resolution. On resolution, it will check how many cards you and your opponent have in your hand, and then negate accordingly. If you do have the same, it negates. That being said, it opens up the deck to be even more broken. If you can end on this card and multiple ways to quick discard on the opponent's turn, this card could be out of this world insane. Like seriously. Because if your opponent activates anything, right? Even if it's a spell from hand, normal summons a monster, so they are lowering their hand count. And if you were the same, but then they normal summon a monster and activate it, let's say just Snake Eye Ash, right? They normal summon Snake Eye Ash. And you both had 5 in hand, but they normal summon it to go to 4. And then they activate it. You can, if you have any quick effect that can quick effect discard a card from hand to put you down to 4 cards in hand and match your opponent, then on resolution, I believe this card will check and just negate the monster that's activating. So negate Snake Eye Ash, and if they try to activate its second effect, again, it should negate it because that card doesn't pull anything out of hand. It's really, really strong. So this card paired with multiple flexible ways to discard from hand would be really, really, really powerful. The potential to negate like 3+ cards, depending on how many discards you have. It is quite strong. So this card's insane. Next up, you have Leviathan. I don't love this card. This card says when this face-up card on the field is destroyed, you can target 3 Fabled monsters in grave and add them back to hand. I like the add back. That's a pretty strong. 3 is a good amount, but it's just not when it's sent. So you do have to like actively destroy this card. There is some accessible tools this deck should have. I'm just not sure if there are going to be lines that make this like worth it overall. You know what I mean? Pop in your own card just to add 3 back. I don't know. Next up is Rajin on Synchro Summon. You can draw until you have 2 cards in hand. The idea here is that you play Fabled, you discard your whole hand just to like spam out a bunch of stuff, and then once you have 0 cards, you make Rajin, and you draw 2. So, you know, you plus kind of hard off of this card, ideally. I just don't know, again, if lines will kind of permit this card being worth it. Could, I just don't know yet. Valkyrus, once per turn you can discard a Fiend to draw 1. Again, just more draw power. Again, not end board pieces other than Unicore. It's just like draw ability, right? And I don't hate this effect. It would have been legitimately interesting if it was a quick effect. Like I said, some of those quick discards, if you could end on this and the Unicore, and this was a quick discard to draw, that would be kind of interesting. But it's just not. So it's a little less interesting. All right, now for the out of Fabled cards. Those are all the Fabled cards that I think are relevant in any way, shape, or form. Now we get to the non-Fabled cards that I think are relevant. Genta. This card discards itself to add Gates of Darkworld. Gates of Darkworld generically banishes a Fiend from grave, discards a Fiend, and draws 1 card. So this should be triggering Fabled monsters, and it gets you draw power, replaces the cards you're discarding. And I think being Searchable off Genta is really good because if this card is banished, it just summons itself back to the field. So you get like a body back, ideally, a draw, and you get a discard trigger. So I think this actually has some potential there. Nightmare Throne, this is generically just good for Fiend deck. Search any 0/0 Fiend. Those main Fiends would be Dark Beckoning Beast. This archetype has 0 normal summons. Literally none. I'd actually like to see a card printed that's actually like a specifically good Fabled normal summon. But if we don't get that, you have this engine to be Dark Beckoning Beast off of Nightmare Throne, or even Grave Squirmer, which is a solid extender as well, specifically when you already have access to Dark Beckoning Beast. But even as just a simple Fiend extender could also, could also be pretty good. And then low-key important to mention, if you're going through opening of the Spirit Gates, this card does have a bonus effect that gets you a discard, right? This effect, what's the bonus effect? Once per turn, you can discard 1 card to special summon a Fiend with 0/0 from grave. So once you've summoned either Grave Skirmer or Beckoning Beast, you can just, once you link them off, whatever, get them in grave, discard a card, and then summon them back. So it gets you a body back, and you're getting a discard trigger, while also just being like a good value card and getting you bodies on field. I think that's pretty relevant. Obviously, the Fiendsmith engine is insane. This is the one thing that I have not even mentioned yet in this video, but this is the one factor that takes this deck to the next level. This deck's probably already low-key, maybe even rogue playable right now, but nobody's really messing with it. The idea is just this deck has a lot of tools. It has a lot of tools in grave, has a lot of tools in hand. It does not have many tools on the field. Fiendsmith could be that implemented like tool on the field to actually help the boards stand out a little bit stronger. Now it does make the deck a little bit easier to like hand trap and stuff, because if you just hard focus on the Fiendsmith stuff with hand traps, then the Fabled stuff doesn't end on enough, and that's what you would hope for from the new support, is that the Fabled stuff could actually stand on its own, and the Fiendsmith stuff is like an assisting engine rather than like, I go first, I'm mainly setting up Fiendsmith stuff, rather than that be like, I can set up Fabled stuff plus Fiendsmith stuff, and if they negate the Fiendsmith stuff, they're just they're just hitting the cards that are going to insulate us, and now we can resolve our Fabled stuff and still end on an interesting board. That would be the goal, I think. But there's no denying the Fiendsmith engine is crazy. This deck has so many light Fiends. You don't even have to make the Link 2. You don't even have to make the Closed Heaven Girl to even get into this. any, like, not any, but most bodies in the deck are just light Fiends. One card, full Fiendsmith combo. Nasty. Not to mention Tractus is the most crazy card in this archetype. This card's a really cool card that you play at 3 in something like Muskets because they already want their light Fiends. But in this archetype, it's even better because not only do you search a bunch of the cards you want in the deck, but it searches then discards. So you also, like, the downside for other decks is literally a bonus in this deck. It has a discard outlet, which is insane. And then you get to the Unchained stuff. Obviously, this is going to be a part of it. Like, you're just going to spam Fiends onto the field, so there's no way this isn't a part of the deck. One Shavara, probably one copy of one of the traps, whichever one you think is better. A lot of people seem to be leaning Chamber instead of Escape lately, but I think that's worth mentioning. And Yama. And then Rage. You'll play a Soul of Rage, I think. But Yama's crazy, right? Just put 2 Fiends on the field. This card is so good. This engine is so good at helping you play through interaction. It's like, oh, you negated this, oh, you negated this, but I put 2 Fiends on the field, so let me make Yama, let me search Shavara, let me pop any card to summon Shavara, and I can at least get Rage plus a trap at worst. Like, at worst from that scenario, and sometimes even, like, significantly better from that. Tour Guide is also interesting. I mentioned this earlier, but this archetype has no normal summons. So it could be something like the card we showed earlier to just be a normal summon, but it could also just be Tour Guide, right? And I think the card that's the most interesting to note, man, it's so far back, I don't want to bring it up. The guy, I can't remember his name exactly because they all have weird names, in Grave, who says discard a card to add himself back to hand. He's the most interesting one because he's level 3. You summon him off Tour Guide, then you link them off. You just get him in Grave super early, and maybe you've already started to go into the one. He's also a light Fiend, so you could also just go into straight Fiendsmith combo, or you could go into Yama. You could pick your poison there. But then from Grave, he's also already giving you a discard outlet. So if you had any cards kind of cloggy in hand, he's giving you the discard outlet. Tour Guide's getting you access to that and more, which is really, really cool. So I like that. Labyrinth is also interesting because Stovey and Chandraglier also both have effects, like quick effects, to discard themselves to or send themselves and discard another card to set one of the Labyrinth traps. That's actually low-key kind of nasty because I believe that still triggers most of the Fabled monsters here. So could be a certain engine to look into. Salamander Catalyzer. This card almost reads like it was designed for this archetype, right? Reveal this card and any other Fiend in hand, special summon one, and discard the other. So more often than not, you're probably summoning this guy, discarding a Fabled. You still get a body, you still get a discard trigger, and if and he also has the potential to like add himself back. I don't think he'll come up too much, but like it's potential, whatever. It's a decent extender. This card also just says if any Fiend monster is sent from, I believe from, is it hand or grave? If a Fiend monster is sent to the grave by card effect, just any card effect, just can't be for cost. This card summons itself back from grave. Level 8 Fiend, if you can get this in grave easily, then that just promotes like this card spamming out. And then a couple tiny extra cards. Muckraker, this is reborning any Fiend, so in a Fiend combo deck, I would think a card like this could be pretty good. And then Abyss Actor, Super Producer. This card's not super relevant, but it is kind of interesting for that synchro we looked at earlier, where if it's destroyed, it adds back 3 Fabled names. This card doesn't have to actually do any Abyss Actor stuff. It can just quick effect pop any of your face-up cards. So you could just summon them both, pop the other guy, add 3 back. I don't know if that's good enough. I don't know if that's worth it, but I thought it was at least worth noting going forward with like deck building stuff. So there you go. I think that's the last card. Yep, it sure is. Fiendsmith is above and beyond, miles ahead of Jurek. I actually don't think they need the craziest stuff, but if they get a couple of just solid cards, this guy, this is Kushano's the one we were looking for to summon off Tour Guide, the Light Fiend. Spicy. But I don't think like needs the craziest support in the world. I think if it just gets like the right type of tools, maybe one good end board synchro, maybe like a good normal summon, maybe another spell or trap could be nice, like actual like engines, like an engine spell that's actually like really good. That could be cool, but we'd have to wait and see, right? I have no idea. It'd be hard to build them right now knowing support's coming, but I do think they have a lot of tools. They have good tools in hand. They have a couple good tools in grave. They just don't have a ton of tools on field. That's the kind of thing I'd like to see at this point. They hit the other facets pretty well. And I also want to see them maybe get 1 or 2 more tools that help them maintain hand advantage. They have a lot of cards that discard, and a lot of cards that, like, when they're discarded, get you a body on field, but not a lot of them that, like, get you cards in hand. So I feel like you can kind of run through your gas really quick with this deck, and I think that would maybe be something they could address with 1 or 2 cards out of the new 4+ cards of support. We'll have to see. But all things considered, I'm kind of excited for this one. Not that I plan on playing them, but like I think that they're pretty interesting, and they have a lot of tools ready. They're just not there just yet. And now they're confirmed. I really want to see what their new cards do to see if it takes them to that next level. They could become the premier Fiendsmith deck going forward if the support is right. But we'll have to wait and see. Otherwise, I'm out of here for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. As always, subscribe to the channel for more fun discussions like this one down the line. And let me know your thoughts down below on Fabled. 1, are there any other cards that you think are relevant? There's so many Fiend cards, I may have missed something. And 2, what kind of support, if you want to get more specific, what do you want Konami to do with the new Fabled cards? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that down below. But I'm out of here for today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.